Hey, what's going on out there? In Deuces Cracked Land, this is John Bull Prey, aka Casino Crime here, and back with another week of good PLO strategy content. Hopefully you guys had an opportunity to check out last week's video on playing 4-bet pots. This week, what I'm going to do is focus on pots where we've donk bet the flop that I thought were interesting. And before I go any further, what I want to do is remind you, please give me some feedback and comments in the forums and in the comments, of course, in the video here. As clear as it hopefully is that I love talking about Pot Limit Omaha more than anything, I really want to talk about the topics that you guys want to learn about or the situations that you find the most sticky. I try to avoid situations where I don't have any content planned, or I just kind of sit down and randomly pick spots to go through. So I'd much prefer if you just spoke up in the forums and said what you want to hear about. Somebody said that they wanted to see a video of me playing 10-cent, 25-cent PLO on Bovada or somewhere else, and that's what I'm going to do next week. So take it as a good opportunity to tell me what you want and to give you exactly what you're looking for. So be sure to do that. All right. Without further ado, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about donk betting in general. Donk betting is interesting because although people are starting to adjust a little bit better to it, I think that it's something that people haven't adjusted completely to. And you can see here that I wrote some of the benefits of donk betting. All right, well, first being it helps neutralize the positional advantage, right? We talked about this in a previous video where we were sort of discussing the merits of check raising and donk betting and which situations are best for it. But really out of position in no limit is mostly a balance between check calling, not nearly as much check raising in my opinion as in PLO. And you can check call a lot more safely in no limit because the equities are different, right? There's more way ahead or way behind situations, but I feel like in PLO there's more opportunities to donk bet, and donk betting is even more it's just more essential to being a balanced, winning, and successful player. And especially for you guys out there who are maybe playing some heads up or thinking about playing some heads up, you really need to learn which situations are good for donk betting. That's just because you're playing so many heads up pots. You're playing half of your pots are out of position, so it's important to learn how to donk bet. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Second being, as I mentioned, it can be deceptive, right? Especially for guys coming from no limit, they kind of are used to people just check calling or check folding. So when they see somebody donk bet, they get kind of confused, and you can induce some floats. You can induce some weird flop raises, and a lot of people, especially more aggressive guys, they really don't like to give up. If they raise pre-flop, they don't like to just give up to a donk bet on the flop. So you can induce some stupid stuff. And the third is that donk betting is nice in both heads up and multi-way pots. It helps you take the initiative, which is good because you can capitalize on dead money the way that you want to, right? You can choose your own flop sizing. It creates barreling opportunities that check calling doesn't. If you just find yourself check calling all the time, it's a lot easier to make yourself vulnerable to barrels. A lot of the one of the biggest benefits of donk betting and taking the initiative in hands is that you get to choose your own bet sizing on later streets, which is always nice. You're not just sort of playing on your heels, as they say. So those are a few of the benefits that are really great about donk betting. So I've got a few hands here that I thought would help us talk about the good situations for donk betting and why I chose certain lines in these different hands. So let's get right to it. In this hand, I actually thought it was pretty interesting because it's also a limping hand preflop, right? A question that I get asked a lot is, when do you open limp? Okay, or when is limping preflop a good thing from early position or middle position? Well, I think that this is actually a good situation for it. You can see here the stats with the player on our right. Maybe I've gone through my HUD in other videos, but I think it's pretty clear that this guy's extremely aggressive. We can see he's a 53-37, aggression factor of 5 over it's not a massive sample, but 256 hands is certainly enough to see if somebody's kind of a maniacal player, or how if it's if they're going to be pushing you off hands and stuff like that. And in general, when I look at someone's HUD, I like to categorize them for like pre-flop aggression and post-flop aggression. And, talked in other videos, and I plan to talk in future videos about sort of how to read HUDs and general player tendencies. And one of the kind of misconceptions about HUDs is that players look too deep into them, or they try to like make reads that aren't there. And some stats in HUDs take a long time to converge. And what I mean is that players will post hands on forums and they'll list a guy's like river check raising stat or like river aggression stat when they've only got like 100 hands on someone. Well, that's not as reliable of a stat if you only have like 4 or 5 hands on someone. But pre-flop stats when you have like 250 hands on people is usually like fairly reliable when we're talking about like VPIP, PFR, and 3-bit. So take that into consideration, I should say. So I mostly just use HUDs for like pre-flop stats. I think that's the most reliable thing about HUDs. But here we limp, and there's actually some pretty good benefits to limping, and I wrote them here for you. One that's nice is that we're unlikely to get raised out of the pot, right? Which is, I think, good with this hand and good against this opponent. If he's 3-betting a lot, if he's kind of punishing our opens, then I think that limping is actually an okay option. Now, one thing to point out is that, especially in 6-max, even very aggressive players, this is when they're facing an early or middle position open and they're in the cutoff. This is usually where their 3-betting range will be the tightest. So I think that if you were opening this is fine, but I actually do think it's an okay spot to open limp. Certainly you can open, and I think against this player, calling a 3-bet probably isn't terrible, but when I'm out of position against someone this aggressive, I kind of think that limping is an option because it provides some good check raising options. It provides, good multi-way action. Like he's going to isolate us a lot of times. It's going to encourage some other callers, and now we have good relative position with a good multi-way hand and good visibility on later streets. Now, another factor to consider is, I think I would open this most of the time if he wasn't there. And I do like having the 10s in my hand because it's good strike blockers. And this is also a spot where, when you open from middle position, you don't get 3-bet nearly as much from both the player and the cutoff and on the button. So I like it. Now, I also think if we're talking about balance, like one of the arguments against limping, especially open limping, is that it's difficult to balance. And if you guys are coming from live games and you're playing more like limp calling situations, that's one of the like questions that you are faced with, right? Is when should I be limp raising? This would be a great spot to limp raise. Like if you actually had a good hand, like especially in live, when you have like maniacs on your left, this is a great spot to limp raise. Like if you're trying to balance it anyways, like if it even matters against players who are paying attention to balancing. So this would be a good spot to like, I would pretty much never limp fold, but I would balance this with like either limp calling or limp raising. So we do limp call. We get a call out of the small blind as well. So we take a 3-way flop top set on a 10-8-6 rainbow. And the reason that I included this hand is that I think it highlights an important point in the difference between a heads up and a multi-way pot. Okay, so this is a board texture that gets c-bet far less far less than other boards. Like if it was 10-6 deuce or like if it was 10-8 deuce, it would get c-bet a lot more often. But when it's 10-8-6 rainbow, even to get very aggressive players tend to check back in 3-way pots much more frequently than in heads-up pots. And I see a lot of players, especially when it gets to be 4-way, in both live and online, they try to like slow play here when they have like 7-9, or in my opinion, like top set's just like an amazing hand in this situation. It's unlikely that I think that the small blind has 7-9, and I certainly want to. it's certainly a hand where like I'm good enough, or I should say our hand is plenty good enough to just like build a pot. You're never gonna get like bluffed by the small blind. Um, and even against someone this aggressive, he's not gonna bluff us either. I think that even most sets would just call, even someone this aggressive. So I certainly want to just like build a pot. I don't want to check and have kind of like an awkward SPR in the turn. Or like check and then check raise and pretty much just like get it in against a straight. Granted we like might get it in against undersets, but I think for the most part I'm just looking to build a pot for value. But that's an important thing that I wanted to highlight was the difference between a heads up and a multi-way pot. In a heads up pot I would be more likely against this player to just check raise for value. But in a multi-way pot I lead here almost always. I think my sizing's okay. I could have gone a little bit bigger in retrospect. I wouldn't mind like 52 or something like that. But this is certainly the smallest I would go. I think most players are just calling or folding. You know, if someone raises here, it's like 7-9 almost always. So, yeah, I would actually be fine just like folding if he potted it, for example. And that's because we don't really have like implied odds when the board pairs, in my opinion. And you're just basically calling the flop to like either boat up on the turn or fold because he's not gonna check back. So we bet, and he calls, turns a queen, and decided to check, and we're facing only like a half pot size bet. This was a hand I played a while ago, and I don't remember what my thinking was, but I was looking back at this hand when I was trying to make the video, and I was thinking, I don't know precisely like why I decided to check call. I actually am not sure. I don't think that like ripping it in here would be the worst. I think my thinking at the time was that I would get more information on later streets. I thought that if I jammed it in, he would just, always fold like if he had a two pair type hand. And of course he has like a lot of Jack-9 combos for feeling the flop. And I think it was my thinking that if he has two pair, for example, he's just going to check back the river. But if he does have the straight, maybe I can get a read on his sizing and whatnot. So check out the turn. He jammed the river. And as I mentioned, I would imagine my thinking at the time was that he wouldn't jam. It's really difficult for him to have bluffs. I mean, the only exact bluff he could have is like something like 5-7, but I don't think he would jam 5-7, but perhaps he would because I played it a little bit passively. In retrospect, this is a little bit of FPS. I think I should have just bet the turn again for value and evaluated the river. One good reason to bluff the turn, two I should say, is that I can't imagine you really get bluffed there. We could easily have straights in our range. Even an aggressive player isn't going to just outright bluff you there. For example, if he has something like a 5-7 or 5-6-7 type hand, they're just going to call again. No one really just bluffs there. Secondly, we can still get called by worse, so we're just value betting, right? And third, you just, like I said, you just basically prevent yourself from getting bluffed or like the prospect of getting bluffed. We did fold. So I'm not ecstatic about the way I played the hand, but again, like we can see that playing out of position can be difficult because we force ourselves into a little bit of FPS, and it was difficult to play on a lot of runouts. So let's move on to the next one. All right, let's check out this next hand. So we call a button open with 7-6-5-4 with a suit. If you are thinking to yourself, hey man, like this is a good squeeze spot, why don't you squeeze? It's deceptive. It's it's doing well against like aces and stuff like that. I think it's actually a fine play, although I think that I'm less likely to do this. Like I would be more likely typically to do this in a heads up pot because my straight draws are like less likely to be dominated in a heads up pot, and stuff like that. So I guess I just decided to only peel because I don't know. It's not like the best hand to squeeze with when this deep. I almost prefer to just um, I would squeeze it with 100 big blinds. I think because your reverse implied odds aren't as high. And here, if I flop something marginal, it's especially in a three-way pot. Like let's say it's like bottom two on it's like on like a four. I'm trying to think of it, but like maybe like 6-7 king or something like that. I can get it in not great, or I could just be faced with a lot of like tougher situations, or like if I flop a bad combo draw or something, So and when you're shallower, like 100 big blinds, I'm fine just like bet calling and getting it in standard spots. But 200 big blinds against two players can be a little bit trickier. So I typically prefer to squeeze a little bit nuttier hands. If I had like 10-9-8-6 double suited, or like Jack 10-9-7 double suited, I'd be a little bit more comfortable squeezing that. But I guess I just decided to play a smaller pot in this situation, and it's fine. But I also think it's probably, if you're skilled post flop and you're playing guys who are straightforward enough and not going to put you in tough spots, then it's fine squeezing this too. But I just decided to call. The flop is great for us. It gives us a pretty big wrap and middle pair and a backdoor flush draw. So I think it's an okay spot to go for a check raise, but I don't really have any reads on the button. And I think typically if I have a good value hand and I don't have reads on someone, I usually lean towards building a pot. Once I develop history with certain players, I can take a lot of different lines, especially when in position. If there will be situations where especially when I'm like 100 big blinds or something, where I can like check back very strong hands against good players. But if I don't have any reads in almost any pot, I really just like taking the initiative and building one myself. And again, as I mentioned in the previous hand, I really feel that, especially in single raised pots, players are a c-bet frequency in position, even with the initiative, goes down significantly. So all of that taken into consideration, we decide to lead 7-9, which is good. And something else that's important to consider is like, although our hand is very, very strong, middle pair, backdoor flush draw, and a wrap, it's like as good as it gets on this board almost. It's still just a pair of fives. So if they fold, whatever, if they fold, they have to be folding some kind of pot equity, which is nice for us. But if they call, we're okay with it too. Oh, I should show you my notes. So, pros of donking: lots of good barrel cards. I can't think of a barrel card that I'm checking on, honestly. Which barrel? Maybe I would check an 8, maybe, but I think I would even still bet an 8 because, as I mentioned previously, people don't like folding to donk bets very much, especially when they're this deep, and especially when it's a single raised pot. You're going to get appeal from over pairers and a lot of different stuff. 3-4x. So I would still continue betting literally any turn card. And if someone decides to raise this, like let's say that the button puts in a raise, especially inexperienced players, this is a set much more often than it is like somehow a big wrap, like 5, 6, 7, 9. Like that would just be a huge cooler. So it's kind of nice, he turns his hand face up, and we get to call with like some implied odds and stuff like that. Now, let's say it was a situation where the button potted it. Let's say he made it 30. I would call, and then if I got there, I actually prefer leading because I think that a lot of sets will just check back. And I don't want to let him get there for free. And I wrote good visibility because there's really it's going to be pretty clear like what our hand value is on most rounds. Like if the turn is if the turn's like a 5 or something, we can check. So And we can also balance this by having not just like super monsters in our range, right? Like I would lead a lot of stuff here, like any pair plus backdoor draws are good to lead. Like if I had ace deuce 3 jack with backdoor nut hearts or backdoor nut clubs, like that's a hand that I would lead a lot here. Another good reason why, and I didn't write it here, but that I'd like to bring up is that it puts donk betting situations like this are good because it puts the button in a very tough spot. He has to fold even pretty strong hands, especially if he thinks you're barely. So let's say that you okay, here's a good hand. Let's say you raise the button and you have like king king queen queen. All right. Even if your play, let's say that you know that I'm me and you know that I'm donking this flop with like a pretty wide range. You know that I'm going to barrel a ton of runouts. It's going to be tough for you to tell which is which. So it allows me to like value bet effectively, and it puts the button has to be concerned that he's either going to make an incorrect fold or an incorrect call on a lot of runouts, and he still has to worry about the player behind him in the pot. So it's tough. Like they're going to fold hands that are better than yours a lot of the time, and we can also have sets and tons of different stuff. And something else that's nice is if the turn actually fills the straight and we bet again, we can get bluff sometimes, or, if we want to check and like look for a check raise against the right players, like it's nice because a lot of players will actually try to represent those cards. So that's good for us. But we do bet. He calls. The turn's pretty terrible, actually. It brings a backdoor flush draw we don't have, and it could easily make him 2-pair, and it also presents another straight draw that's, again, like pretty easy for him to have. He could easily backdoor like 8, 9, 10 here. Ace, 9, 10, like there's definitely 9, 10s in his range, or even 2 pairs, and backdoor flush draws. So it's really not a good card for us, but again, like I said, true to my word, there's no turn that I'm going to be like just check and giving up here. So we barrel and get called, and river is 7, so actually this is an interesting spot, and it's one reason why I included this hand, because I think the river spot is cool too. So, hey, if you find yourself value building this spot, then it's actually fine. But one reason that I decided to check this, I guess, was that I thought he could have bluffs in his range. I didn't think that he actually would call a bet with 7-8. Or, an 8-5 is, I think, unlikely, because I think a lot of his like 8-5 combos would have raised the turn. But the thing, I think that he can value bet pretty much any straight. So check calling is nice because we lose less the times that we're cooler, and we also can have him like attempt some bluffs because it actually connects pretty well given the action. So check, he bets 43, call, and he does in fact have, he turns like a nut flush draw to go along with his gutter and bottom pair. So I think it's a hand that highlights a good donk betting opportunity. Alright, I think this is a pretty fun one. And it highlights a lot of the stuff we've talked about, but it takes it one step further, I think. So, got a reg that opens in the cutoff, and a loose, bad-looking player that calls from the small blind. So we call from the big blind with like a gappy, kind of junky, double-suited hand. Notice the difference between like a 9-8, 7-6 double-suited hand. Like, all right, well, let me back up a little bit. A novice player might look at this hand and say, and not see the difference between like 9-8, 7-6 double-suited and 9-7, 3-5 double-suited. But there's actually a very big difference. One thing that you'll notice is the way that this hand is suited. The 9 and 7 are suited, and the 5 and the 3 are suited, and that's a big deal. We would prefer that it was like it was 9-3 suited and like 7-5 suited, because it would change like the rank of your flush draw. Now, granted, like that doesn't matter as much when we have these like lower suited cards, because your flush draw is kind of dominated or it's not, but it certainly makes a difference, and it definitely makes a bigger difference the more you move up in rank, so that you can cooler people and get value from worse flushes and stuff like that. Secondly, the gappier a hand is, the more polarized its post-flop equity is. Now, that's good in multi-way situations, actually, because you need gappy hands to flop stronger wraps, which is nice. If a hand exactly like 9 7 8 6 can't flop like a really powerful 20 card wrap, for example. So there's just like subtle differences between 9 7 5 3 and like 9 8 7 6. Now, if I had 9 8 7 6, like I would probably like never squeeze this hand as it's like this exact hand, but I would certainly consider squeezing like 9 8 7 6 with a suitor, definitely like 9 8 7 6 double suited. It's again like we talked about in previous hands, it's deceptive. If you get 4-bet, it's fine. But I think there's there's like a significant difference between this hand and a 9 8 7 6 with a suitor double suited. Now, one thing that's important to look at in this player's stats here, for example, is he's pretty passive overall, right? There's a big difference between someone who's like 47 38 and someone who's like 47 22 and has not 3-bet once, in 66 hands. Granted, like according to my stats, like I'm playing a little bit collie pre-flop too, but something tells me I got a hunch that I might have had good reason for that. So we take a flop. It comes ace 4 5 rainbow, and we talked a little bit about the kind of like triangle of relative position last hand, right? And this is another good example of it. We are second to act, and the pre-flop raiser is sort of sandwiched behind us. Let me bring up my notes here. So that's a good situation for us. The pre-flop raiser really is in a tricky spot. If he calls, his hand is sort of face up as being like an ace inside cards or something like that. I look at boards like this in this way, where if you've done any combinatorics work, you'll know that like 6 7 8 X is a pretty it's a pretty specific combination of hand. And what's much more common in someone's range would be like ace X. So when you look at the makeup of someone's range, their hand is much more likely to be like ace X than it is 6 7 8. So it's kind of nice because when we donk and the sandwich player calls, we know that his range is just, even if he had opened the button, his range is so much more ace X than straight draws. So it's nice. The reason that it's nice certainly isn't because I am concerned or like worried about getting coolered when the 6 fills, for example. It's more so about me being able to barrel straight, completing cards confidently. So there's so many runouts that we went on, right? And even when he actually does have a lot of times he'll fold. Like if he has kings, he's just gonna fold. And a lot of times players who have like ace X might just fold because of they know that they don't really want to just raise here with the stack depth, certainly, and they got to worry about the player behind them. So some players will just like fold ace X. But even if ace X wants to call us, or if he has like top set, there's just a lot of great runouts that we can win on. So, and that's kind of what I wrote here, is that ace high boards, or even king high boards in this kind of situation, you'll get a lot of like calls and folds, which is good for us. And that was what we mentioned in the beginning of the video as being one of the benefits of donk betting, was that we get players to call and fold, and we kind of take initiative in the hand, we keep our range disguised, and we capitalize on the dead money that way. Something else that's cool is we have a 2-pair blocker here, we have like a wheel blocker here, and in general, like as a rule of thumb, like anytime you have like blockers to the range that can raise or call, like raise your donk bet and like raise you off of the hand, or that can even like call you, you're gonna have a pretty good donk betting opportunity. And now throw in like when we're beat like a little bit of equity, we've got like our 5 is likely to be live. We've got like we've got the the deuce for the straight draw. We've got 6 for a straight draw. We've got 2 backdoor flush draws, but importantly that they're not non-nut. There really is just, there's a lot of ways for us to win the hand. And if we do get raised, like who cares? All we have is a pair of 5s and 2 shitty backdoor flush draws and like 2 non-nut gutters. So it's just this is a great donk betting opportunity. In a heads up pot, I would be check raising this, God, like almost 100%. It's just, again, like a great check raising opportunity to heads up pot. But in a multi-way situation like this, um, I would donk. So here, donk, we get called. Again, like as I said, this is a great barrel card for us. I don't like checking because I think we could easily be beat here if he has like ace 4. And I want to be able to take the same line when I've got a straight. And not to mention that if let's say that I somehow did have 6-8, it's just really likely that ace X is just trying to get the showdown. So I don't want to give I want to like continue betting my hand. I don't want to give like a backdoor flush draw, a free card. And my plan here is just to like follow through and bluff. And that's what we do. And it's cool to look at our sizing, like look at the it's the way to look at this river is that I certainly would choose the sizing with a straight because the majority of his range is like either it's like sets 2 pairs and straights, and I think that a straight is probably going to call no matter if I bet like 80 or more. But if I have a straight, I want to make sure that I get called lightly, and not to mention that here I would be likely to value bet any straight. So like if I did have 2-3, I think I would still value bet. If I of course have like a 6-high straight, I would definitely value bet. But given the action, I think we're beat a lot, so I'm actually bluffing with this hand. But the sizing is kind of nice because it's not to say that he never has a straight, because you certainly run into a straight sometimes. But I think that he like always folds if he doesn't have a straight. So it's cool, like, yeah. So let's move on to the next hand. Okay, so today we're going to end the lesson on kind of an interesting spot that I get asked about pretty frequently. And I wanted to discuss the merits in like situations where I might take this line. So we open from middle position with ace king jack 7 with a suit. Standard so far, of course. A very aggressive player over a big sample 3-bets us from the button, and we call. So pretty standard so far. I think that if you're 4-betting this, it's not terrible against this player. He's very aggressive, clearly. And it's not, I've talked in previous videos how I'm more likely to call with ace queen jack 7 and 4-bet ace king jack 7 because we have blockers to aces and kings. But we're a little bit deeper than 100 big blinds. So I think that like I don't really want to be in a situation where I like 4-bet and fold this hand. And one thing that's nice about having this out of position is that I know that when the boards come like ace king x, king jack x, ace x, king x, stuff like that, boards that actually connect with me, he's going to be c-betting almost always. So it's nice to have these types of hands in that range and not, and pick up dead money from his c-bet in that way. But I don't think that 4-betting would certainly be like the worst here, especially because he 3-bet from the button, and most players' 3-betting ranges from the button are wider than they are from the cutoff, or like from like if he 3-bet, let's say he 3-bet from the small blind, 4-betting it I think would be pretty bad. I would much prefer calling. So we call, and it comes jack 10-9 rainbow, and we donk bet 26 into 39. I've experimented a lot with this line where like we call 3-bet out of position and donk bet on these like wetter boards when it comes when it comes like middling cards. And I think that it's good in the right situations, and here's a couple that I think that it's good for. Well, one reason that I like this is because when we check call, it opens us up to getting barreling, or getting barreled, I'm sorry. Two being that when someone's three betting range is this wide, he actually is going to miss these types of boards a lot. So although that a lot of players have three betting ranges that include a lot of middling cards, especially in these types of situations, someone who's like this aggressive will actually just outright miss, which is okay. So, but someone who's also this aggressive is pretty willing to barrel. So if I check call, and especially when I have a hand that's not really great to check call on a lot of runouts, I don't mind donking and then, like kind of sighing and folding if he raises. And third, if we were shallower, like I don't mind just like check raising and getting it in. But you can also be sure that on this flop, he's certainly going to be connecting with it a lot with like 7/8, queen eights, king queens, and stuff like that. Something else that's nice is, and I've talked about this in other videos too, is that when we have a hand that really wants to like see or get to showdown or see all 5 cards for a cheap price while also like disguising our range a little bit or keeping it wide, I'd like to take it. And here I think, and it's, well, let me back up, especially when they have hands that like they might play passively that we lose to. So like if he has like 9-10, for example, or if he has like Jack-10, like we have equity against those hands. But I don't want to I kind of like this line because we can like bet the flop, and then if he just calls, then it's less likely he has king queen, and it's more likely he's going to just let us get to showdown when he's in position. So I like it. As it stands, like he just folds. But I thought it was kind of a good spot to talk about like playing these types of boards. Now, if I actually had, he doesn't really know this, but I think that most of the time if I had king queen, although I might just donk it because I think again it could be deceptive and you might get looked up lighter, I might just check raise. But again, like it looks so strong when you check raise this type of flop. I would frankly like almost prefer to just have like a pure bluff. So that's gonna do it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Always like to hear your feedback in the comments. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I really would appreciate it if you gave me some input on what you'd like to see next week. So take care. Let me know what you think about the hands. And as always, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to email me as well. Casinocrime, KASINOKRIME @PLOQuickPro.com. Thanks, guys. Good luck.